Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna. Good morning. So today we continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the second canto, first chapter. Today's text is number 16. And this is Shukadeva Goswami speaking to Maharaj Parikshit. Krihat pravajito dhira punyatirtha jalapluta shuchau vivikta asino vidhivat kalpitasane. Krihat pravrajito dhira punyatirtha jalapluta shuchau vivikta asino vidhivat kalpitasane. Grihat pravrajito dhira punyatirtha jala plutaha shuchau vivikta asino vidhivat kalpitasane. Please chant.
Grihat Pravarjito Dhira Punyatita Jalapluta Sucho Vivikta Asino Vidhivat Kalpitasane. Hare Krishna.
Grihat pravarjito dhira punyatirtha jalapluto Shucho vivikta asino vidhivat kalpitasane.
Hare Krishna. Grihat pravajito dhiraha punnatirtha jalaplutaha shuchau vivikta shino vidhivat kalpitasane.
Thank you. Okay. Grihat, from one's home. Pravarjitaha, having gone out. Dhiraha, self-controlled. Punya, pious. Tirtha, sacred place. Jala aplutaha, fully washed. Shuchau, cleansed. Vivikte, solitary. Asinaha, seated. Vidhivat, according to regulations. Kalpita, having done. Asane, on a sitting place. Translation. One should leave home and practice self-control. In a sacred place, he should bathe regularly and sit down in a lonely place duly sanctified. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. To prepare oneself for the better next life, one must get out of one's so-called home. The system of Varnashrama Dharma, or Sanatan Dharma, prescribes retirement from family encumbrances as early as possible after one has passed 50 years of age. Modern civilization is based on family comforts, the highest standard of amenities, and therefore, after retirement, everyone expects to live a very comfortable life in a well-furnished home decorated with fine ladies and children, without any desire to get out of such a comfortable home. High government officers and ministers stick to their prize posts until death, and they neither dream nor desire to get out of homely comforts. Bound by such hallucinations, materialistic men prepare various plans for a still more comfortable life. But suddenly, cruel death comes without mercy and takes away the great plan maker against his desire, forcing him to give up the present body for another body. Such a plan maker is thus forced to accept another body in one of the 8,400,000 species of life, according to the fruits of the work he has performed. In the next life, persons who are too much attached to family comforts are generally awarded lower species of life on account of sinful acts performed during a long duration of sinful life, and thus all the energy of the human life is spoiled. In order to be saved from the danger of spoiling the human form of life and being attached to unreal things, one must take warning of death at the age of 50, if not earlier. The principle is that one should take it for granted that the death warning is already there, even prior to the attainment of 50 years of age, and thus, at any stage of life, one should prepare himself for a better next life. The system of Sanatan Dharma institution, of the Sanatan Dharma institution, is so made that the follower is trained for the better next life without any chance that the human life will be spoiled. The holy places all over the world are meant for the residential purposes of retired persons getting ready for a better next life. Intelligent persons must go there at the end of life, and for that matter, after 50 years of age, to live a life of spiritual regeneration for the sake of being freed from family attachment, which is considered to be the shackle of material life. One is recommended to quit home just to get rid of material attachment, because one who sticks to family life until death cannot get rid of material attachment, and as long as one is materially attached, one cannot understand spiritual freedom. One should not, however, become self-complacent simply by leaving home or by creating another home at the holy place, either lawfully or unlawfully. Many persons leave home and go to such holy places, but due to bad association, again become family men by illicit connection with the opposite sex. The illusory energy of matter is so strong that one is apt to be under such illusion at every stage of life, even after quitting one's happy home. Therefore, it is essential that one practice self-control by celibacy without the least desire for sex indulgence. For a man desiring to improve the condition of his existence, sex indulgence is considered suicidal or even worse. Therefore, to live apart from family life means to become self-controlled in regard to all sense desires, especially sex desires. The method is that one should have a duly sanctified sitting place made of straw, deerskin, and carpet, and thus, sitting on it, one should chant the holy name of the Lord without offense as prescribed above. The whole process is to drag the mind from material engagements and fix it on the lotus feet of the Lord. This simple process alone will help one advance to the highest stage of spiritual success. Translation again. One should leave home and practice self-control. In a sacred place, he should bathe regularly and sit down in a lonely place, duly sanctified. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Budhule Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitanamane Namaste Saraswate Deva Gaur Vanipacharni Nirvishesha Shuni Vadipaschacha Deshatane Om Ajnanat Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhya Chakrapa Sindhubhya Evya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So, today we are talking about our end game, the human life end game. So in chess and other games as well, there's this thing called end game. So chess is a fairly complex game. The pieces all move in very specific ways. There are certain exceptions. But even if one understands all the rules of chess and can play, if one doesn't understand the end game, which is slightly different, then you can't actually win. What'll end up happening is you'll end up, even if you have the advantage, even if somehow during the regular game of chess you've captured more pieces than the opposing your opponent has, there's every chance that if you do not know how to work your end game, that you can't checkmate your opponent. So therefore you can't win. You end up in a stalemate, or you'll end up, as you're carelessly chasing the opponent's king around the board trying to pin him down, sometimes you can make a mistake, and even though they have fewer pieces, they can actually mate you. They can trick you into something. So end game is very important in every game, but especially the human form of life. It's the most important. And that's what we're talking about here. This is a continuation, of course, from yesterday's verse. Yesterday's verse was talking about how at the last stage of one's life, one should be bold enough not to be afraid of death. So that's the first thing, not fear death, but one must cut off all attachment to the material body and everything pertaining to it, and all desires thereof. So then today's verse is getting into the specifics of that. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend yesterday's class, but in yesterday's verse, this term asanga shastrena was there, the weapon of detachment. I'm not sure who gave class yesterday, but did they mention where asanga shastrena is also mentioned throughout the rest of the shastras? Did that come up?
I don't think so.
Okay. I didn't want to repeat something that was just said if it did. So this term that was in that verse, yesterday's verse, asanga shastrena, the weapon of detachment, it appears several places, but most notably in chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita, when it's talking about the imperishable banyan tree. It is to be cut down by the weapon of detachment. That's in verses 3 and 4. And that term is also there, asanga shastrena. So this weapon of detachment is a very important thing for us, for we aspiring devotees to cultivate, attain, and sharpen. And so we have to understand what this means. So today's verse then is showing an example of what that means, right? So this is, again, as I said, it's the human life endgame, or what I'd like to call our transcendental retirement plan. And these are the important things. So I actually first, before I get into it, I want to go through just sentence by sentence of the purport, because there's a bit to unpack. So Srila Prabhupada starts out, to prepare oneself for the better next life, one must get out of one's so-called home. So this so-called home, Srila Prabhupada makes sure that he wants the readers to understand that this is whatever you have accumulated, whatever you think that you are in control of, whatever you are trying to enjoy, it's not actually yours. And he wants to make sure that we understand this. It's a so-called home. This isn't our home. The material world's not our home. This is a temporary place. So anything that we can accumulate in the material world, it's not really ours because it's temporary. And the symptom of the soul is eternality. So nothing temporary can satisfy the eternal soul. So it's so-called home. So we're not thinking in terms of I, me, and mine, right? Because that's the problem. The problem with household life isn't that, you have a wife and you have children and you have activities that you perform and duties. That's not the problem. The problem is the attachment to it. The problem is that you think it's actually yours to control and enjoy, right? So to prepare oneself for the better next life, one must get out of one's so-called home, right? So the so-called part is the most important part of that sentence, because if we're identifying with that and we think it's ours, that's the problem. And that's why we need to get out of it, right? If we're not, and this should be mentioned here, if we're not identifying it as ours, if we are actually seeing it as just an instrument that Krishna has given us, then in some very rare circumstances, we don't actually have to leave the home. In fact, when one of the stages of Vanaprastha, when one's retiring, and we see this in the example of Dhritarashtra and Gandhari, one of the stages of Vanaprastha is that the husband and wife actually stay together. They just leave the house and they leave society. They retire from social interactions and they focus completely on spirituality. So there's no more fancy clothes. There's no more, family gatherings. There's no more anything like that, but it's just completely focused on spirituality. Very simple life, but they can remain together. So it's not the place necessarily, or the people, or the interactions, but it's the attachment to those. So a lot of times, when I said it's a very rare situation when one can actually stay, a lot of times these two go hand in hand, the things and the attachment, because it's difficult to separate the thing from the attachment to it many times. So therefore, for most people, it's recommended that you actually leave the home. And then as this purport progresses, we're going to see that we also want to make sure that we're not falling into the other extreme where we actually leave our home, but then we build another home somewhere else and we're just as attached. We want to make sure that's not happening. So we'll get to that. So then Srila Prabhupada continues. The system of Varnashram Dharma, or Sanatan Dharma, prescribes retirement from family encumbrances as early as possible after one has passed 50 years of age. So it's worth mentioning here that the system that we follow, Varnashram Dharma, Sanatan Dharma, it understands that we have material conditioning, right? It's not oblivious to the fact that here we are in the material world. So no surprise, those who are here have various attachments, right? So this system that we follow is very understanding of that. It doesn't say, all right, well, you have attachments, go ahead and do whatever you got to do, come back when you're worthy. It doesn't say that. It says, okay, here is how you can interact with those attachments that you have in such a way that eventually you will understand the spiritual side of what you're interacting with. And gradually you will become naturally detached from them because you will understand that they actually belong to Krishna and they should be used in a very specific way in Krishna's service. Right? So that's the system of Varnashram Dharma or Sanatana Dharma, is that it understands, okay, you have attachments, so here's how you engage those attachments. But when you come to the age of 50, which is generally speaking, I mean, these days the lifespan is decreasing, but there's the potential to live to 100 years. So 50 years is, halfway through. And I can say from experience, I'm not quite to 50, but I can say that there's a major shift between the younger years and the older years. The body stops working the way that it used to work. And you also have learned to manage your expectations of the material world, especially if you're doing it right. Now, I have also witnessed a lot of older people who are just as materially attached as some younger people, and that's unfortunate. But if we go through life at least conscious, aware of what's actually going on, it's not hard to come to the conclusion that we don't belong here. We are eternal beings, and this is a temporary place. So we don't belong here. So it's not that difficult of a conclusion to come to. So if we follow Varnashram Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, if we acknowledge what our conditionings are and properly dovetail them as prescribed in the Varnashrama system, then by the age of 50, we're convinced that, okay, I'm not the controller, I'm not the enjoyer. Therefore, now that I've spent basically half of this life trying to, trying to deal with, my conditioning, trying to live my life in the way that I see, that I thought was fit. Now I should, start at least, taking life more seriously and understanding how we're actually meant to act. Now, obviously, ideally, we would do that before we're 50, as Srila Prabhupada is also going to mention. But by that point, after living, life like that, we see, okay, it's a good idea. So then Srila Prabhupada continues, because now that we understand that that's what one should do, now Srila Prabhupada says what most people do. So modern civilization is based on family comforts, the highest standard of amenities, and therefore after retirement, everyone expects to live a very comfortable life in a well-furnished home, decorated with fine ladies and children, without any desire to get out of such a comfortable home, right? So Srila Prabhupada said what's recommended and then how that's possible. And now he's saying, okay, and this is what most people do. So you don't want to fall into this category, this trap, where we just think that after retirement, we should actually even increase the comforts of life, because now I don't have to work anymore. Now I can actually enjoy more. We talked about this several months ago. I guess it was over the winter. I think I was in Mayapur when we were talking about retirement, transcendental retirement, and what people think of retirement in the so-called modern civilization. And then Srila Prabhupada continues, giving another example of people trying to grasp on to this concept of I, me, and mine. So high government officers and ministers stick to their prize posts until death, and they neither dream nor desire to get out of homely comforts. All right, so they don't even want to inquire into the absolute. They want to just hold on as tightly as possible, and somehow think that some miracle is going to happen where death doesn't actually come and they can continue to enjoy. And then Srila Prabhupada says, bound by such hallucinations, right? Because that's obviously an illusion. You can't hold on to these things. They're material. Bound by such hallucinations, materialistic men prepare various plans for still more comfortable life. But suddenly, cruel death comes without mercy and takes away the great plan maker against his desire, forcing him to give up the present body for another body. Right? So it's a complete illusion, just like this runs parallel with Bhagavad Gita chapter 15. So this is the upside down banyan tree, which is the reflection of the real banyan tree. Right? And so it looks the same. as all illusions do. Illusions look just like the real thing. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called an illusion. It would just be called a facsimile or an imitation. But it looks very similar. So it's very convincing, illusions. So we actually take them for reality, right? So bound by these materialistic men, they try to continue to grasp onto these things that they can't grasp onto, and then they're forced to accept another body in the 8,400,000 species of life, according to the works that he has performed, right? Then Srila Prabhupada continues, in the next life, persons who are too much attached to family comforts are generally awarded lower species of life on account of sinful acts. So no surprise there. However we live our lives, then our next life is going to be determined by that. And so then Srila Prabhupada is talking about how human life is generally spoiled because we're just basically living an animal life, just eating, sleeping, mating, defending. We're not actually inquiring into the absolute truth. And so we end up again becoming animals. Then Srila Prabhupada, he wants to give us the solution. So first he told us what is to be done, how Varnashram is set up, then what most people do, why what most people do is actually dangerous. And now Srila Prabhupada gives if you want to avoid that danger, right? So in order to be saved from the danger of spoiling the human form of life and being attached to unreal things, one must take warning of death at the age of 50, if not earlier. Now, this sentence, my favorite part of this sentence, is being attached to unreal things. So again, Asanga Shastrena, the weapon of detachment. This is what we need to acquire and use. 3 weeks ago, we were talking about the qualification of the hearer of Bhagavatam, the speaker of Bhagavatam, the interactions, that the suitable interactions between the two, the proper types of questions, etc. And when we were talking about that verse, because Maharaj Parikshit, when he asked the question, he asked, what is the path or the way of perfection for all men, especially for one who's about to die? But first he said for all men, right? And so the second verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, first chapter, I quoted that verse when we were talking about this 3 weeks ago. And it talks about how the Srimad Bhagavatam, it kicks out all these other varieties of Kaitava Dharma, cheating religion, these processes that in the name of religion, they're actually just trying to also enjoy. So these cheating religions, they cut all that. And the Srimad Bhagavatam propounds the highest truth. And then I asked if anyone knew what that highest truth was, because then it's also mentioned in that verse. Does anyone remember what is the highest truth that's given by Srimad Bhagavatam? No? Okay, that's okay. Anything worth being heard is worth repeating. So the highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the benefit of all. Right? So again, following the today's verse and yesterday's and Bhagavad Gita 15th chapter, knowing the difference between reality and illusion, or the substance and the shadow, right? Then that's why Srila Prabhupada writes in this particular sentence, in order to be saved from the danger of spoiling a human form of life and being attached to unreal things, one must take the warning of death at the age 50, if not earlier. So if one wants to understand the difference between what's reality and what's illusion, what's substance and what's shadow, then one should be very serious to, at the age of 50, if not earlier, as Srila Prabhupada said, we should take this warning of death. We should understand that this life in this material world is temporary. It can't fulfill us. And anything that we acquire or try to enjoy, we're not going to be able to keep the things that we acquire, and we're not going to be able to actually enjoy the things that we're trying to. There can't be any satisfaction there because we are eternal and material is temporary. So then Srila Prabhupada continues. So now, of course, he's talking about, if not earlier. So the principle is that one should take it for granted that the death warning is already there. So don't wait till 50 to think, okay, this is now death might be coming. No, it's already there, even prior to the attainment of 50 years of age. And thus, at any stage of life, one should prepare himself for a better next life, right? Because we don't know when we're going to die. Lifespan, like I said, potentially it's 100 or a little bit more. Some people live a little past it. I was going to look up the statistic, but I didn't. But I think the lifespan is fairly, like, it's definitely considerably lower than 100. It might be in the 50s or 60s. But anyway, I don't know for sure, so don't quote me on that. So at any stage of life, we should be preparing ourselves, because even if, like I said, the system of Varnashram Dharma or Sanatan Dharma, it shows us, okay, here are your conditionings, no problem. Here's how you dovetail them properly. Now, as you're dovetailing them, you are also preparing yourself for the next better life, because you're gradually understanding that these things aren't mine to enjoy. They're actually Krishna's, and there's a proper way to actually be using all of these things. So Srila Prabhupada continues, the system of Sanatan Dharma, of the Sanatan Dharma institution, is so made that the follower is trained for the better next life without any chance that the human life will be spoiled, right? There's just no chance that the human life will be spoiled, because it's very clear. Sanatan Dharma is very clear to distinguish what is illusion and what is reality. And so if you follow Sanatan Dharma, not just say, okay, yes, this is what I believe, but if you actually follow it and you do not become attached to the illusory things, that you only become attached to the real things, you properly, successfully follow it, then there's no question of wasting this human form of life, right? So the better next life is guaranteed for one who is properly following Sanatan Dharma. Then, so we're getting lower on time, so I'm gonna just summarize the rest of this actually. So the holy places are there to remind us of Krishna, right? So today's verse is talking about how we have to leave the home. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually have to leave the physical home, but in most cases you do, right? In most cases you do. And you go somewhere that's going to remind you of Krishna, because the home that you've lived in for a very long time, there are many things that are going to remind you of points in the past, right? Different interactions that you've had with your children that are going to bring back certain emotions and attachments. And so it's not the ideal place to spend that the end of life. The ideal place is somewhere that reminds you of Krishna. Now, if your home, like I mentioned before, actually does remind you of Krishna, and you don't have those personal attachments, thinking yourself the controller and the enjoyer, then of course you can stay right there at your home. But the important point is that we have to be somewhere that reminds us of Krishna. So that's what the holy places are for. They're there to remind us of Krishna. They're not there, for example, to rid us of sin. That's one of the things they do, but that's not what they're for. So when you go to the holy place, say you go to Navadvip, where Lord Chaitanya performed his pastimes, and you bathe in the Ganga, she takes away your sins, and you get out and you say, okay, now I'm sin-free, now I'm all set, right? But if one continues this enjoying mentality, or being attached to the illusion, not distinguishing what's substance and what's shadow, and being immersed in that shadow, then it's just like the elephant bathing, right? The elephant bathes, it gets clean, but as soon as it gets out of the water, it puts dirt all over its body and it gets again dirty. So if we don't get rid of this mentality, if we're not actually going to the holy places to remind ourselves of Krishna, and to remind ourselves how each thing that we do, and ourselves included are to be engaged in Krishna service, then we're not taking proper advantage of the holy places, right? So as Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport, we don't just want to set up another home there, right? And then become again attracted to the shadow, the connection with the opposite sex, and again falling into this concept of I, me, and mine, the controller, the enjoyer. So we certainly don't want to do that at a holy place. We don't want to do that anywhere. That's the point. So when we go to the holy places, we should be conscious of what exactly we're trying to accomplish, to get out of this material world, to distinguish reality from illusion, right? Let's see, right. And so then Srila Prabhupada's mentioning that to live apart from family, to become self-controlled in regard to sense desires. So we have this verse at the beginning of Upadekshamrita, talking about how to control all the various aspects, the senses, to anger, basically becoming a Goswami, but especially the sex desire, but everything else, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the desires of the tongue, belly, and genitals. So, and the way to do that is to leave behind the concept of I am the controller and enjoyer of X, Y, and Z, my home, my family, my accumulations, my property, and understand that everything it comes from Krishna. And then without offense, chant the Lord's holy name, and discuss his pastimes, etc. And then so Srila Prabhupada then continues the last two sentences. The whole process is to drag the mind from material engagements and fix it on the lotus feet of the Lord. That's what Sanatana Dharma is. We have our mind engaged in these material engagements. That's our material conditioning. But the process is to show us how to actually properly engage our proclivities, our propensities, right? And so in other words, we're taking our mind from those material engagements, and then we're fixing that mind on the lotus feet of the Lord, right? And then the last sentence, this simple process alone will help one advance to the highest stage of spiritual success, right? And that's all we want to do, we aspiring Vaishnavas. So to sum up, the human life, the end game of human life is a very important thing to master, right? Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves, we think that we understand what's going on. We have some idea of the philosophy. We think we're in good shape, but at the end of life, all of a sudden we realize, oh no, I actually have a bunch of attachments, and I could have dealt with them had I, according to Shastra, had I actually engaged my senses properly. But instead, I just figured, I know the rules. I just think of Krishna at the time of death, and I'll be all right. So this human life endgame is very important to master. And thanks to the system of Varnashram Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, if we properly follow it, properly understand it, and properly follow it, we are making preparations for the end of life at every moment, right? Because we are understanding the difference between reality and illusion. So when following Bhagavat Dharma, again, Sanatana Dharma, Varnashram Dharma, we are constantly being reminded that since everything comes from Krishna, everything should be properly used in his service as directed by the Shastras. And we ourselves, as parts and parcels of Krishna, must also be properly and favorably engaged at every moment, right? So everything belongs to Krishna, including us. So everything should be properly engaged. And Shastra tells us how to engage those things successfully. So our whole lives are preparing us for the human life endgame. But if we are not following Bhagavat Dharma properly, and we think ourselves in control of the situation, then when death comes, we get an appropriate material body to continue our journey until we get it right. And like Srila Prabhupada mentioned in the purport, if we are absorbed in enjoying, in engaging in sin and enjoying and controlling, then that birth won't even be a human birth. That'll be a lower species birth, and then we have to wait until we work our way back up to human, and then try to get it right from there. So it is in our best interest to sincerely follow Bhagavat Dharma at every stage of life, not just wait until 50 or wait until after 50. Because what happens most times is people get that warning at age 50, and then they say, okay. But, and even at the beginning of the purport, it was mentioning that as soon as possible after 50. So sometimes people, they start their careers a little later, they have children a little later. They want to make sure that they are able to, provide you got to follow the Dharma. You got to provide for your family, make sure that they're properly situated. You don't want to leave, like a 3-year-old kid behind. You want to make sure that they're, properly situated and established and can, understand the difference between right and wrong. And, hopefully they also are being taught Sanatana Dharma. So sometimes it's after 50, but generally what we do is, we're like, I still feel pretty okay. I still have many things that I can do. I can still make more money. I can still, provide for the, forget about the children, the grandchildren, the great grandchildren, and then this always reminds me when I start thinking of this, it reminds me of Bhumi Gita, where Bhumi is laughing at all these great, powerful kings, and we're talking about emperors here that actually, they actually made history. But even them, she's laughing at, because even if their dynasty lasts for several generations, they've trained their descendants in such a way that they're still able to maintain power for even 10, 20 generations of people. Even them, that it's just a flash, it's just a blink, it's nothing compared to eternity. So what was the point of all that? So we might think, okay, well, I've prepared for my children, but it'd be even more magnanimous if I can prepare my grandchildren and great grandchildren also. For sure, that's nice, but you do what you can, but you have to focus in the end game. You have to focus on yourself and focus on making sure that you're doing what's right. So at any stage, and then, as I mentioned before, this system is designed to recognize our material conditioning, right? And no matter what that conditioning is, no matter how deep that conditioning is, Bhagavat Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, Varnashrama Dharma teaches us how we can gradually purify it by engaging it in Krishna's service according to Shastra, right? And then gradually, instead of doing these things for our own pleasure or for our own sense of control and enjoyment, we start doing them for Krishna's enjoyment because we're following Shastra. And again, the system of Sanatana Dharma isn't that, oh, you have material conditions? Well, come back when you're worthy. No, it says, okay, well, let's start now. It doesn't matter what your conditions are, because you can properly engage them in Krishna's service. You just have to follow the Shastra, right? So there is plenty of time to address our conditioned nature and come to the conclusion that we do not belong in this material world. I'm going to tell a quick story. When I was young, we drove around a lot, our family, and so sometimes we would visit. We'd go to the West Coast because we had family out there, and so we'd be driving to a lot of places. In some places, we'd get to a town, we'd get to a rest stop where there's no other rest stops for like hundreds of miles. So, it's like, it's your only choice, but it's in a pretty shady area. It's not the kind of place where you would want to stop, but it's your only choice. You got to get gas, you got to get snacks, and then you got to continue your trip. So when we would pull into one of these places, my dad would turn his head back to look at all the kids in the back seat. We were in the big station wagon, and he'd say, "All right, kids, don't get too comfortable. We're not staying long," because he didn't want us dilly-dallying or running off or talking to strangers or anything like that. It's like, I'm filling this car up with gas. Your mom's going to go in and she's going to get some food. You can get out and stretch your legs because you've been sitting in the car, but don't go too far and don't get too comfortable here because we're not staying long. So this is what our attitude should be about the material world. We shouldn't get too comfortable because we're not staying long. Whether we want to or not, you can't stay this material world. I mean, you could stay in the material world for a very long time, but you can't be aware of it. Every time you leave your body, you forget about it, and then you go again and again and again and again. So we can't be satisfied here. This isn't the place for us. This isn't a place where we should stay. We are eternal beings. This is a temporary place. So we shouldn't get too comfortable because we shouldn't be staying long. So when it comes to the material world, don't get comfortable. Don't think, oh, okay, I'm going to acquire this. I'm going to make a very comfortable home. I'm going to, whatever. Just don't think that way. We're not staying long. This material world isn't for us. We are eternal beings. This isn't where we're meant to spend our time. And we are part and parcel of Krishna. We are minute fragments of Krishna. We are not independent controllers and enjoyers. Our true bliss, our Nanda, comes from serving Krishna. And I realize that the verbiage of that can sound strange to an outsider. You're not happy unless you're serving someone else. It sounds like someone's trying to convince you to do something that you don't want to do. The verbiage of that, right? That's how dictators, force you into servitude. They say, no, this is your natural position. You have to, but this actually is our natural position. We are part and parcel of Krishna. Krishna is the absolute whole, and we are minute fragments. And we do actually derive satisfaction and bliss from serving him because he reciprocates with his parts and parcels. So when he sees that someone is sincerely serving him in a favorable way, he reciprocates, right? And so that's actually a relationship. And so that's where the true bliss comes from, because it's eternal. Here in the material world, we get a reflection of that. That's called the illusion. It looks just like it, but it's not real. So we get these glimpses of positive relationships, right? Different interactions. But we find that actually it can't last because the material world is temporary. So we have to understand the difference between the two. We have to be able to understand the difference between reality and illusion, and we have to act accordingly. Okay, so we will stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, go ahead, Mataji.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm just about about renouncing everything at the age of 50 and take shelter of Krishna. But like practically speaking, like a lot of devotees, we've seen the ISKCON movement. They're 50, they're practicing Krishna consciousness, but they don't leave home. So it's not practical for everybody just leave home and go. But that actually they are practicing Krishna consciousness. They're getting more serious in their spiritual life. And I'm saying, what will you say about it?
Okay, that's a good question. It's a valid question. So in many cases, as I mentioned, and it's rare, but one can actually stay in the home if one is constantly being reminded of Krishna at home. Now, generally, we don't necessarily. The reason why the verses and purports like today are important for us to understand is what happens is if we don't understand this, then we observe those who are actually able to stay at home and not be distracted by family life and not be pulled into this attachment of this is my family. I provided this house. They're here for my enjoyment, etc. Um, but if they see the example of someone that is staying home and they're properly engaged, then they think, okay, I can do that too. But maybe they can't. Maybe they're fully attached, right? And so for them, it would be more beneficial to gradually to develop that attitude, to at least wean off of it. It might be gradual. So that has to be understood. The attachment has to be addressed. So if we find that the attachment isn't going anywhere, that we're still just we're still considering ourselves the maintainer, the controller, the enjoyer of our family, then we have to study more Shastra, get more association with devotees, and it may be necessary that you actually have to leave that situation once everybody's situated and settled and can take care of themselves. Then okay, if I can't in this environment actually come to the consciousness, the conclusion that everything is meant for Krishna and then act accordingly, then yes, I should go. And so we have to understand this. So some people, as you mentioned, they're doing fine in their Krishna consciousness at home, and that's great, and they should continue to do so. But those who are not actually doing that well, they may, and they're trying to follow the example, then they have to either find a way to remain there but become detached from the situation, or it may come to the point where they actually have to physically detach themselves. And again, one of the stages of Vanaprastha, you can bring your wife, but generally the kids aren't there because that's not where they are in their life yet. Living the very, very simple life. Some are. I've known many families where the kids from birth, they were basically, Goswamis, living a very simple ashram life. So it's possible, but very rare. So we just have to understand that. So it's not that what we shouldn't do is read something like this and say, okay, well, that was for another time. It's not practical these days, and sort of like, and dismiss it. We definitely shouldn't do that. We have to at least understand that the principle is that we have to be understanding the difference between what is real and what is illusion. We have to make sure that we are not actually thinking ourselves independent controllers and enjoyers. And if we are, then we have to come up with, or we have to follow some process, whether it's through the Shastra, through the Guru, through sadhus, to become detached. And if we can't become detached in that situation, we do have to eventually leave, because no matter what, we have to leave it. When we die, we're gonna be leaving it, right? So it's one of those things where you sometimes it's better to leave it before you are forced to leave it, right? But again, it's important to, if you do physically leave your home, that you don't establish another home somewhere else. You can't bring that mentality with you. That's called palgu vairagya. It means you're actually renouncing something, but you're still thinking about it. And so therefore you're still cultivating it. And so you're just going to do it somewhere else. So you want to make sure you're not doing that either. So the point is that one has to become detached. Whether it's keep maintaining the situation or changing the situation, the detachment is the most important thing. And for most people, the actual situation has to eventually change because there are too many reminders, right? There's just too many reminders that are there that are bringing you back into this mentality of controlling and enjoying. Does that make sense?
Nice. Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Sure. Yeah, these are very important to understand, these instructions, because like I said, it's our tendency to say, oh, but there's so many examples, and there are examples because, Srila Prabhupada's movement's very powerful. And so it's very effective. So we can see examples of people living with their wives and being completely detached. Both of them are fully engaged in Christian service. We see examples of that. But we have to understand that if we are not completely, our consciousness isn't completely focused on Krishna when we're in our in our family situations. We have to at least try to gradually bring ourselves to that point through the process of devotional service. But if we see that that's not actually effectively working, then when it comes to the end of life, we have to take it seriously enough to actually go somewhere and concentrate, go to a holy place and actually do this. Hopefully that's any other doubts there?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
In addition to what you said, I have heard a class regarding this Vanaprastha. And in that also, the Prabhu who was giving the class, he mentioned that Vanaprastha means going to Vana or the forest. But these days, even Prabhupada said, because all the ashramas are mixed up, because we are not proper brahmacharis, we are not proper ghatas, so how we can expect to become proper Vanaprastha or sannyasi? So in that case, even the Vanaprastha these days, a person can live in the home and separate, with the wife, but not have any relationship with her. They just live kind of, friends and help each other to become better and better in Krishna consciousness. But the main thing, again, is detachment with the kids and all those. Even if we are present here and our mind is in Vrindavan, so still Prabhupada said that you are in Vrindavan. But if you are in Vrindavan and thinking about your place in America, so we are in America. So this is the thing, I think, the consciousness which needs to be connected, rather than going in certain place, as you mentioned, Prabhuji, that if we go into certain place and we make that place our home, so what is the use? So the actual meaning of Vanaprastha, which that Prabhu mentioned in the class, is that we should, our consciousness should get detached, and we should engage our time, energy, money, everything in preaching, which is the core of our movement, preaching the glories of Krishna consciousness and spread this movement and improve this movement and increase the movement. So that's what that Prabhuji mentioned, that the Vanaprastha is. And I also read some of the literature from, different in books also, the, which is second on the opinion which I am mentioning, that it's not that because nowadays, if we leave for the Vana, and what if some wild animal will eat us up? So will that be the the purpose of our Vanaprastha life? No, the purpose is actually the detachment, as you mentioned, and also the consciousness should be engaged in Krishna and that's the main important stuff. Sometimes we understand that Vanaprastha is just leaving everything and going to the forest and, try to practice and try to give more and more austerity to our body. But the thing is that the main idea behind our fasting or doing anything is to please Krishna, as to become Krishna conscious and to make the world Krishna consciousness by going conscious by preaching. So just wanted to add, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Yes, thank you for that addition. I will add one thing to your addition, because obviously, as we've been mentioning the entire time, it's the consciousness that is most important. But the externals also help with the consciousness. They don't. It's not automatic. If you go to the woods, you're going to be thinking of Krishna, obviously. But if you compare being in the woods, the Vana, to being in a city, for example, there are so many things in the city that are competing for your attention, trying to take Krishna's attention, away from him. And in the woods, there are fewer things. So that's why Krishna recommends it's wherever reminds you of Krishna. So he says holy places. So wherever Krishna's pastimes took place, that's good. I also mentioned that sometimes, and you also mentioned, even if you're in America, but you're thinking of Vrindavan, then you are in Vrindavan. So I mentioned that even if you're at home, you can be in a holy place. But also in the forest, there isn't anybody trying to convince you that there's no God. That doesn't mean that you can't be an atheist in the forest. You absolutely can be. But there's nothing here in the forest. I'm actually in the forest right now talking. There's nothing here in the forest that's trying to take the attention away. You're only dealing with your mind, which is, the most important thing to deal with. But it's like, a kid, you put the kid in a candy store, he's going to be distracted and he's going to be running all over the place and grabbing this and that and the other thing. And if you put the kid in a place where there aren't such distractions, then, the kid can be more peaceful. It doesn't mean the kid will be peaceful, but it's a lot easier to be. So while it's not essential to go to a forest or to a place where Krishna's pastimes have taken place, it is essential to bring one's consciousness to that point, right? And that's exactly what you were saying. But I just wanted to point out that there's a reason that throughout the Shastra, this is actually recommended, because, because in the forest place like that, there are fewer things trying to take your attention away from Krishna and his majesty. So there is something to it, but one shouldn't just rely on that. Like, don't just go to the holy place and build a home, or go to the forest and be completely distracted. So all the preparation has to be there. But these are things that we can consider that can help us. They are valuable details. It's not the principle, but they are valuable details that can help us get to the principle. Yes, thank you for sharing that. Anything else? Kalpesh Prabhu.
Would you hear me?
I can.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances. All glory to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Prabhupada.
Very nice point you brought up. Sometimes I have the mixed feelings as well, because it's very natural to think about like Vanprasth and thinking about it like, but there is no Vanprasth right now. There are none forest existing, and it's some of the things which are not really practical too when we our life to the Grihastha. So then I am trying to also explore what are the other possibilities for thinking about it. Then I came across about the Grihastha and Grihame, the topic on that subject which is going on. And there are in Bhagavad itself, there are 12 Mahajanas. And when we see that 12 Mahajanas, some have chosen the Grihastha ashram and some have not. So there are mixed of that. And generally the question is being, can somebody staying in the Grihastha ashram really can get the self-realization and attain the God, or he has to just follow the different orders of ashram like Vanprastha or Sannyas in order to really elevate his consciousness. At the same time, I'm seeing there are several points on the Grihastha ashram on the family love and affection, where one of like our books only says that it is a natural to have an affection for others and especially for other Vaishnavas. But Krishna consciousness does not occur from simply negating or stifling worldly affection, nor are family ties necessarily an impediment to Krishna consciousness. So, Prabhuji, if you can like explain a little bit on that, like, is it practical enough to stay in the Grihastha ashram and do the Krishna consciousness and like till the death, or like, because the Mahajana examples are being given. I don't know.
Thank you for that question. That's an important one. So as I mentioned, I have met families where even the children are basically Goswamis from birth, and we're talking many children. We're not talking just like a couple. We're talking like 7 kids, and they're all living basically an ashram life. And so if you're in that situation, everything's Krishna conscious. It's fine, right? They don't even know of mundane things to be distracted by. They've never seen mundane television or movies. They've never heard mundane music. All they know is Krishna Katha. So if that's the circumstance, then you're good, as long as within that, there's no subtle attachment of thinking that I am the doer of this situation, right? I made this ashram, and I've, in other words, if there's this feeling of I am that's separate from Krishna, no matter where you are, no matter what situation you're in, you're not going back to Godhead, right?
Mhm.
You may be getting closer, but you're not going back, right? There has to be this detachment. So it does, the externals aren't the deciding factor, but the externals can help you get to. So in that circumstance, the externals of the family are actually helping you because they're all trained properly. So say you're having a day where, just something's off, something's wrong with your consciousness, but your wife and children, they're not having an off day, they're having a great day. And so you can see by their example, oh, okay, I just have to bring my consciousness back into where it should be, right? So that's actually helpful, right? But for some, the situation can be the opposite. One can be, otherwise mostly focused, but there's so many other distractions in the family life, and that's the general case, right? Generally, you're not going to get that example of, the family who's all completely Krishna conscious and they're not trying to, control or enjoy separate from Krishna. Generally, that's not the reason people get, married. So I want to actually rewind to earlier in your question. When you started the question, you were talking about the practicality of living, in the woods. We would say it's impractical these days. So that I want to address, because it's actually not impractical. We conditioned living beings, especially now in this particular age, we very much confuse the difference between necessities and commodities, right? There are things that we absolutely say we need. It's absolutely necessary, but they're not. We don't need them at all, right? They're just commodities. And as long as we think we need something that is actually not necessary, then we'll think that a lot of things are not practical. Like, no, that's not practical because I need this, 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 and this, and that those aren't there, right? So we have to understand through Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra what actually is necessary. And the only thing that's necessary is the proper consciousness of I am servant of Krishna, right? And so whatever helps get us there, whether it's living a proper family life or, living in the woods, whatever will get us to that point, that is what we need to focus on, right? But this idea that something is, especially something that's recommended in the Vedas, the idea that it's now somehow become impractical, that's an improper understanding of what Vedic means, and it's an improper understanding of how the material world works, right? So that we have to understand. But as you mentioned, the Mahajans, some went through the Grihastha ashram and some didn't. So it's not the situation you're in that's going to determine where you're going. It's the consciousness, right? And so the consciousness, we have to surround ourselves with a favorable atmosphere. That doesn't mean either family life or woods. It means if we're in family life, it should be favorable, that the family should also be engaged in Krishna service. We should be helping each other out, reminding each other of Krishna. But if we're in the woods, we should be understanding that, all of the things that we are collecting, they're all coming from Krishna. Being in the woods is also really good for faith. So was it you that just mentioned, or was it the Mataji about being in the woods and then a wild animal comes and eats you? So what was the point? But the thing is, when one goes to the forest, the point of going to the forest is the level of faith that I'm not in control, Krishna. Now you're in control. Everything that's coming to me, it's coming to me because of you, right? And so there's this level of faith. and dependency on Krishna that is developed. I'm not saying that everyone that goes to the forest has this. I'm saying that that's how we're meant to enter into these sort of situations, to leave behind what we thought we needed that was material, and to just accept what we actually need, which is spiritual, right? And to depend and rely completely on Krishna. And so there's a power in that. And so it's a valuable tool that if we use it properly, it can help us in our Krishna consciousness. So the same as the Grihastha ashram, if we use it properly, it can help us in our Krishna consciousness. If we use it improperly, it will harm or delay our progress in devotional service, right? So no matter what instrument we're using, we have to use it properly, right? And so generally, the point of today's verse is that generally people don't use the Grihastha ashram properly, but proper use of it ends in being completely attached to Krishna. Everyone, not just you, but the whole family. And if at the end of life we find that we're being reminded of things from the past that are bringing up old materialistic memories, then it's best to just leave that situation, go somewhere where you can completely focus on Krishna, like a holy place or a forest, or maybe it's just, it doesn't even have to be a recognized holy place to most people. If you had a wonderful uplifting spiritual experience in a certain place, say there was a retreat somewhere that they've just rented some sort of lodge, somewhere. It wasn't built as a temple, it was, but you went to this retreat a bunch of times and you had, so many great memories of association with different devotees and all, like that. So you can go to that place because to you, that's the holy place that reminds you of Krishna, right? So holy place just means, it doesn't necessarily mean the place where Krishna's pastimes physically took place. It means the place that reminds you of Krishna, right? So the devotees of the Lord are called holy places personified because they carry with them remembrance of Krishna's pastimes, right? So wherever we can get that connection, whatever situation it can be, whether it's through the Grihastha ashram, whether it's through, like that. But in general, part of the Grihastha ashram is also getting out of the Grihastha ashram, at least in the mentality. So yeah, you could be living with your wife and helping each other in devotional service all the way to the end. But that's a very different thing than householder. That's not householder life anymore. That's Vanaprastha, right? So the idea is, anyway, I think we hit the point. Is there anything else? Did that address everything?
Yeah, Prabhuji, it helps, but it just like it has to be realized, and then you have to do like stuff, right? But yes, faith will come. I think so by me listening more.
Okay.
Very much, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead, Mataji.
No, I just want to say that this Purushottam Mass is good. Thank you, Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Very, very nice class. And really, it's difficult to leave everything because we have been accumulating things for such a long time. So very difficult to leave things, but I'm trying to focus like time in learning like this Bhagavatam and study slokas. And okay, I wanted to say that the Purushottam Mass is going on, and you also mentioned about chapter 15. So I heard that we should study about chapter 15 of the Gita. Do you think, I don't remember about chapter 15. Do you think that one, chapter 15 and this shloka, this verse, they are related kind of? They are.
Yeah, the concept is the same, especially yesterday's verse, because it even has that same term, asanga shastrena, the weapon of detachment. Because the idea of the beginning of the 15th chapter, anyway, the 15th chapter goes through a few different topics, but the beginning is the whole concept of distinguishing reality from illusion and acting accordingly. And the reflection of the banyan tree, which represents the material world, which is what we're trying to enjoy, but we can't because it's just a reflection. It's not the substance, it's just the shadow. It's reflected off of desire. That's what the water is. So anytime we have a desire separate from Krishna, then we're dealing with the illusion. We're not dealing with the reality, right? So to understand that, that's how the chapter is all laid out. And you cut that down with the weapon of detachment. So detachment means getting rid of that desire, or dovetailing that desire. It means you could still have the desire, but instead of the desire for your own senses, the desire to use it properly to please Krishna. Right?
Yeah.
So that's essentially what that chapter is, and that's essentially what today's and yesterday's verse were talking about. Being able to distinguish the difference between reality, the substance and the shadow, the reality and the illusion, and to act accordingly. So that was yesterday's verse, and then today's verse, of course, is more about because it's Maharaj Parikshit. He's at the end of his life, and so what should be done then is you go someplace where there's no distractions and you completely think of Krishna, right? So yeah, there are parallels there.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Very nice. Very clearly
Sure.
explained.
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
Prabhuji, one more thing. Yesterday class, I asked about the detachment, and it was mentioned the Yukta Vairagya. So it was said like Rupa Goswami is suggesting like we should follow that. Also, so as long as we are in this material world, we have to somehow act, and we cannot cease the acting. Therefore, performed for the Krishna to Krishna. Then we need to do.
Yes, thank you for bringing up Yukta Vairagya. It's a very important concept, and it's a very powerful tool. So one thing that Yukta Vairagya, the main example I usually use is Srila Prabhupada used a dictaphone. So his books, he didn't type them, he spoke them. He spoke them into a dictaphone, and then his disciples then, listened to that, his voice, and then wrote it out. So all the books we have are a result of Yukta Vairagya, right? So using modern technology at the time to serve Krishna. So that's proper Yukta Vairagya. Now, what I see happening nowadays is people are using this term, Yukta Vairagya, to just justify doing whatever they want to do, right? Well, I want to do this, so hey, Yukta Vairagya, right? And we have to make sure we're not falling into that trap. There is actual Yukta Vairagya, like we mentioned, but then we have to make sure we're not falling into the trap of, I'm just getting this because this is what I want. Like, so another a prime example that applies to most people is, like a cell phone or a laptop. Most of us right now, we're using Zoom, so we're either using a cell phone or a laptop. And so we think, all right, well, I'm going to get this thing because I'm going to use it in Christian service. I'm going to do so much preaching, and I can keep in contact with the devotees and hear so many lectures. But if when we get the thing, we find that most of the time we're on it, we're, looking at social media, which isn't always devotional. Sometimes there's some stuff in there, but really what we're reading some other stuff, or if we're streaming movies, or if we're, playing games, if we're doing things that aren't actually reminding us of Krishna or preaching, then we have to at least try to limit ourselves on these devices to, to use them more for Krishna service and less for our own personal sense gratification, gradually to get there. But we shouldn't just call that Yukta Vairagya. Part of it's Yukta Vairagya, when we're actually connected to the service of Krishna, then yes, you are utilizing that thing in the service of Krishna. But if we're just using it as a justification to have, fancy things, then it's not yukta vairagya. It's a false justification of something. So we have to understand what it means. Is that okay?
That's right, Prabhuji. So you mentioned very important point, which is likely, like I am also loosely using. So basically, you're saying not to use the term loosely. We have to really practice it and understand that this is what the intent is. But like just asking, like if you but if you have to practice the yukta vairagya in your life and you want to be sincere about it. How do we really tell to ourselves? Are we
Well,
like really doing that, or like because
the way we determine whether we're doing it or not is the word vairagya means renunciation, right?
Yes.
So Srila Prabhupada was renounced from that dictaphone. He was using it in Krishna service, and it was a very valuable tool. But if it got taken away, he would figure out another way to make his books. He would, because when he was in India, he was actually manually putting the typeset to do Back to Godhead magazine, right? Each letter he was placing in there. I don't know if you know how old print presses work, but you actually had to put these metal letters and you had to spell out the whole page and then, like that. And so he was doing the typeset. So he was renounced, right? That's vairagya. So he's using it because it's there and it's convenient, but he's not attached. So if it got taken away, he'd be fine with it. He'd do it some other way. So if someone stole our computer, for example, would we still find a way to attend Bhagavatam class? And would we still, all of these things? So if that's the case, then okay, good. Then we're on the right path. But if we're just using it as an excuse to, be able to keep up with local and global news and this and that and the other thing, and occasionally we'll also listen to some Bhagavatam, that way we don't feel guilty about having this technology. Those are two very different things. So the vairagya part, the renunciation, that's what really shows. So if we're attached to something, it's not vairagya. Oh, my battery's dying. Is that clear? Did that make sense?
I think
Okay.
I got another question, but it's okay. Your battery is dying, but if like I can put a question and then we can talk whenever you are free. So it is like if we when we do, like even for Krishna, right? We are attached to Krishna. Let's say I have a house or I am using something for Krishna, and if it is taken away, will be not. I know it is difficult to understand between whether it is my attachment or it is for Krishna attachment. But if it is for Krishna attachment, we still get disappointed. Like, for example, the temple is taken away or something, then we will not like it, right? Because we are attached to Krishna. Then how do we really see those things, Taken
Yeah.
away is the way to measure it from material standpoint. That are we not really, like you gave a very good example in that if my phone is stolen away, would I find another way to attend the class? That is the right way of looking at it, because that is the right spirit of vairagya. But
Yeah. So, like you said, if the temple's taken away, certainly we'll feel that, and it'll be inconvenient. We'll think, "Oh no!" So that feeling of regret and like that of loss, that's fine. But then, are we going to figure out another way to continue to serve Krishna, whether it's going to another temple or just getting together with the devotees who used to go to that temple and then continuing to do those, activities like Bhagavatam class and Kirtan and things like that. So it's not necessarily the way you feel when it's taken away that shows if you're detached, because you can be attached to spiritual things, and that's good, right? So, like, for example, when a great personality leaves his body, his or her body, we feel the loss. We know that it's not a bad thing, because they're just moving on to, in Krishna's service. But now we don't have them in our presence anymore, so we feel a loss. So that loss is okay, even though some might say, well, no, that's an illusion to feel that loss, because whatever the case may be. But the idea is, no, you were valuing that association. That association is no longer there, and so there's that feeling of loss. That's fine, but one has to then use that as inspiration to live your life according to their instructions, and to also take more advantage of those other senior devotees who are still around, so that you want to make sure that you're also not missing out on anything important like that. So yeah, all of these things are there.
Okay. No, that makes sense, Prabhuji. Excellent points. Thank you very much for clearing these doubts.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Very nice class. Lot of points I wanted to ask, but I got answers.
Oh, okay.
It's already 9. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Charuchandra Prabhu, for taking the time. I know we've gone way over, but thank you for patiently making us understand.
Thank you for the kind words.
Thank you very much.
See everybody again tomorrow morning at 7:50.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Kalpatarubhyasya pasandabhyasya pattanam pavanebhyo